Good afternoon, everybody. It's 1 o'clock here in Bangkok, Thailand, and welcome to this media briefing. My name is Steve Needham. I'm the Senior Communications Officer for the International Labour Organization for the regional office here in Bangkok for Asia and the Pacific. Today's briefing, we're looking at the Asia Pacific Employment and Social Outlook 2020, which we often refer to by its acronym APESO. So if you hear APESO, you'll know we're talking about the report. The APESO is being launched today and has been produced by the ILO Regional Office for Asia and Pacific, based here in Bangkok, Thailand. We will have two speakers today. They are Chihoko Asada Miyakawa, the ILO Assistant Director General and Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific, and Sarah Elder, who is a senior economist at the ILO Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, and also the lead author of the report. We'll put the names into the chat so you have the spellings and the positions. We'll have a short presentation of the findings of the report. Then, of course, we'll move to the Q&A session. Please note we have both the press release and the report are available. The embargo on these is 2 p.m. Thailand time. Hopefully you will have already seen these. If you haven't, please put your name in the chat and your email in the chat, and we can send them over to you. Before we start, please can I ask everyone puts their the way their name appears on the Zoom so that we can see your name and news organization just to see who you are. That would be very helpful. Thank you. So let's get underway, and I will pass the floor to Chihoko Asada Miyakawa, ILO Assistant Director General and Regional Director for Asia and the Pacific. Chihoko-san, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming for the launch of the second edition of Asia Pacific Employment and Social Outlook. The previous issue of APESO was released 2 years ago in October 2018, when economic and job growth in the region was still strong. Yet, still the robust economy was not translating to adequate improvements in the working lives of most men and women. The Asia-Pacific region continued to be plagued by high rates of informal employment, low social protection, and weak platform for social dialogue. All these gaps kept most workers in jobs that do not bring a sense of economic security. These were the circumstances of the region's labor markets up to the beginning of 2020, when COVID-19 pandemic hit us with force. Economic growth was still high but weakening. Most people were able to work, but still few people were in what we would qualify as decent jobs. Consequently, this meant few countries were on target to meet the target for decent work and inclusive growth set in 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Then the blow of COVID-19 pandemic came with devastating impacts that are setting countries even further back on the development trajectories. It is this story that the report sets out to tell: how the COVID-19 crisis has impacted the lives of hardworking men and women in the Asia-Pacific region, how governments are trying to cope, and what this means for the region's future of work. Let me now turn it over to the coordinator of the report, Ms. Sarah Elder, to tell you more.
Thank you so much, Director Chihoko. And welcome everyone to the launch of the APESO 2020. I will keep my intervention quite short, which means in a sense that I'm not doing near justice to the details that are in the report itself. I'll give a sort of global overview of how the COVID impact has filtered down into the labor market in the region. But I'd invite you, if you're interested in a specific country or a specific sub-region, to please dig into the report. There's a lot of great information in there. It's been a labor of love, and it comes quite late in the year, but there's a reason for that. It's the longer we wait, the more information that we have, and we've really done a lot to pull in as much countries with information throughout the year of 2020 as possible. So the report itself is divided into three main sections. You have the first section, which provides a baseline of where the labor market outlook was prior to the crisis. And here we have, as Director Chiolko has said, it's very important to remind ourselves that we're in a region where even despite the reasonable level of economic growth, we have not seen nearly sufficient progress in the areas of decent work. And this is even prior to the current crisis, which is in fact makes up the bulk of the report in the second section. And then we have a final section of the report, which looks at the packages of policy responses and makes some recommendations on where governments would need to concentrate actions to move beyond what would be a basic recovery to one that really tackles the more deep set issues of inequalities and labor rights. Okay, so let me now delve into the main findings. And here, I think it won't be surprising that we're not going to present a very happy picture for labor markets in the region. So first and foremost, we focus on the issue of working hour losses. And the reason we do this is because this is an issue that really sets this crisis apart from previous crises. With the lockdown measures that so many countries in the region have had to work through, you've had workers in sectors like tourism, manufacturing, accommodations, that have had to reduce their working hours or have not worked at all while still maintaining some attachment to the job. This includes also the informal workers, the self-employed workers who work for themselves. So they still have their job, their enterprise, but they have reduced their hours of work. So how this translates into the cumulative effect is the reduction of working hours for the region of 15.2% in the second quarter, and 10.7% in the third quarter over the hours worked in the last quarter of 2019. Now, these are some of the highest reductions in working hours across the globe. And there are connected consequences with the reduction in working hours. First of which is that people are working fewer hours than they would like to work. This is reflected in an indicator called the time-related underemployment rate. And here we have country-level information that shows time-related underemployment has grown even fivefold amongst some of the countries. A second consequence of reduced working hours is, of course, I think the more painful one, which is the reduction in labor income. And here our estimate is that in the Asia Pacific region, we've seen as much as a 10% reduction in labor income in the first 3 quarters of 2020. Now, this reduction in labor income is highest in the region of the sub-region of South Asia, where labor income loss has reached even 18%. Now, again, related to lost labor income is a very dire consequence which is the reversal of poverty trends. And here the report estimates an increase of 22 to 25 million working poor in the region in 2020. And what this means is that while people are still working, they're still living with their families on an expenditure of less than $1.90 per person per day. So really, that's certainly insufficient to live a secure lifestyle and to put food on the table for yourselves and your families. Now, what about the job losses? And here we have to say that a lot of jobs were saved over the course of this crisis, have been saved over the course of this crisis by the fortitude of the enterprises, the capacity of enterprises to retain some of their workers, despite the lack of income being brought in. And this is in fact in part thanks to the degree of government support. So governments have done a lot to support enterprises through wage subsidies, which have in turn saved jobs. But of course, the longer the crisis goes on, the longer that profits are in cash, the sooner cash runs out, And it's inevitable that some jobs are lost. In fact, that we have seen in all of the countries where we have data that employment has dropped over the course of 2020, especially in the second quarter of 2020 over the same quarter in 2019. Now, if we put together all of the information that we have, we're able to present a first regional estimate of job losses. And we project that 81 million jobs have been lost in 2020 for the region as a whole. And which this translates to a drop of 4.2% in employment numbers over the pre-crisis trend. The scale of the jobs gap are higher for women than men, for young persons than adults. And if we look across the subregions, the jobs gap has been highest in the subregion of South Asia, followed by Southeast Asia. So where do these people go when they lose work? Well, the report shows that most of them are moving outside of the labor force into inactivity, and the rest moving into unemployment. So we've seen an increase on both inactivity and in unemployment, with women more likely to move into inactivity than men, which is a trend that we consider to be very worrisome, knowing from previous crises that it is in fact much more difficult to reactivate persons once they move into inactivity than if they maintain some attachment to the labor market through unemployment. So it's one of the consequences of this crisis has really been the harsh blow that we've seen to gender equality. Likewise, young persons have been particularly affected by the crisis. Now, there's so much more that we could say, but I think we'll be able to get to a lot more details through the question and answer. I will address some of the questions, as will my colleague Christian Viegelen, who is in fact a co-author of the report. So I will stop here and now turn it back to Steve. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks a lot for that, Sarah. Okay, let's now move to the Q&A session. As Sarah mentioned, we also have another colleague with us, Christian Viegelen, who is a senior economist here at the ILO office in Asia and Pacific. We'll also put his name in the chat here. There it is if you need that. Okay, if you wish to ask a question, please raise your hand and we can take the question if you have anything to ask. You should be able to see the button to raise your hand at the bottom of the screen. If you don't see it, you can go to the participants button and click that, and it should bring up an option to raise your hand. So please do that. Alternatively, if you'd like to put the question in the chat, please go ahead and you can do that. When I come to you for the question, please, if you could start off by just letting us know who you are and where you're from. Okay, let me turn to the first question. Can I turn to the name here is Di Chen. Di Chen, would you like to go first? My colleague will unmute you. Di Chen, is it possible to unmute Di Chen, please? Apologies for the technical glitch here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead. Thank you.
I'm Dean Chen, I'm with AFP. I'm just wondering, this is a very quick clarification question. What's the difference between like inactivity in the labor force and unemployment? Can you clarify that? Thank you so much.
Certainly, yes, that's unemployment is in fact a very true concept, which is, but it does have a very specific definition. So you are unemployed if you are out of work, available to take up work, and looking for work. So the reason why you see so many more persons that are inactive than unemployed is this variable of looking for work. I mean, particularly during a time of economic crisis when you know that there's not a lot of jobs out there, you might simply wait it out. And if you are in fact waiting it out, even if you are without a job and available to take a job, you are inactive. So that is the very technical definition. In this region, we do not have a lot of people who are unemployed. Unemployment tends to be higher in higher income countries, which has to do, in fact, with the labor market institutions and the fact that in lower income and emerging economies, we still have a great deal of persons working in the informal economy. In this region, in fact, we have still 2 in 3 persons working in the informal economy. So rather than waiting for a job in the formal sector, they're simply getting on with it and making their own income in the informal economy. And you do tend to have, where you have stronger informal economies, lower unemployment rates.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Can I now turn to May W? May W, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, May.
Hi, my name is May and I'm from CNA, Singapore Television Station. I've got a couple of questions. First off, I'd like to have you zoom in particularly on, say, Thailand, for example. Anything particularly worrying about the labor workforce in Thailand? My second question is, when we talk about Thailand, for example, it is the worst economic performer in the whole of ASEAN. I'm just wondering whether or not that is reflected in terms of the results that you're seeing in the labor force as well. And my final question is, Thailand is highly dependent on migrant workers. Did the report take into consideration how much of an impact that has made on the results? Thank you.
Okay. So Thailand, as you say, is a very particular case, and it's very interesting to see the very dire GDP contraction that IMF has put out for Thailand, but it's not unexpected. It's also a country where there was some contraction expected even before the crisis hit, and one of the reasons for the stronger impact in Thailand than in some of the other countries has to do with the sectoral composition of the country, its extreme dependence on the tourism sector, and its dependence on global supply chains. So, in fact, throughout the report, there are other countries. We emphasize that the sectoral composition of employment does have an impact on the results that we see in terms of employment loss. So in the Republic of Korea and Thailand, half of the jobs lost from the second quarter over the previous year were in these sectors that we consider to be the high impact sectors, meaning the accommodations, manufacturing, retail. So Thailand is a very interesting story because it always has very low unemployment, but we are seeing an increase in unemployment in Thailand, although it still remains at a low level. In the third quarter, it jumped up to 1.2%, which really, it sounds like nothing, but that's double what it was the year previous. So we've seen a 70% increase in the number of unemployed persons in Thailand. So even if, well, let me just say that it fits the story across the region, where employment took a huge cut in the second quarter, but employment recovered a little bit in the third quarter. But that's not to say that everything is well at all, because unemployment continues to increase in the third quarter and inactivity continues to increase in the third quarter. And this is a story that we're seeing in a lot of countries in the region. So I think Thailand has, they've taken a nice approach to keeping the pandemic at bay. And they've probably saved a lot of lives by closing their borders. But in doing so, it's also had some pretty dire consequences on the tourism sector. And that's going to take quite a long time to recover.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Let's turn now to Andre Jagundo. Andre, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Hi there, my name is Andre. I'm working for TDM, radio and TV broadcast based in Macau. I would like to also to ask a couple of questions. One of them is related with the conditions of the migrant workers, which the report states is one of the worst hit groups with this social and economic crisis provoked by the pandemic. And I would like to ask a question about the situation in Macau. I think maybe it's very particular, but nonetheless might be an example of what is happening in other countries or regions. I don't know. I would like to ask about that. Is the fact that in Macau, due to a recent change in the law, migrant workers, they need to leave the region to be able to start a new job in Macau. But under the current anti-COVID measures that are in place, if they leave Macau, they are not allowed to come back. So many of these workers, what actually happened is that they lost their jobs. They don't have any source of income, but because of travel restrictions, they cannot leave Macau in the short term. But still, they are legally prohibited to search for a new job, even if they have a job offer. So this leaves them in a very, very fragile situation. And I would like to ask if you have any knowledge of any similar situation in the Asia Pacific region, and knowing that that these workers are one of the worst hit by this pandemic, social and economic crisis. Thank you so much.
Christian, do you want to start on this one, or shall I?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, so I mean, as you pointed out, yeah, migrant workers is really among the group of workers that are hardest hit, and also as the report points out. And I mean, I think, you know, like the hardship comes really from several yeah, through several channels, because basically, I mean, a lot of times they are simply stranded there where they are, unable to find a job, or I mean, in some cases, as you mentioned, even not permitted to take up a job, so they don't have any income. Then very often they are actually, yeah, not covered by the social protection system that is in place. So I mean, we have quite a few cases where the social protection systems don't cover these migrant workers, especially those that are working in the informal economy. And yeah, many times they are also not really yeah, they are not in a situation to travel to their home country. I mean, a couple of months back, or but even now, I mean, the home countries also have travel restrictions in place. And then, I mean, as you mentioned, for the case of Macau, yeah, it would then be basically it would then correspond to, yeah, kind of leaving the country, and yeah, perhaps not being able to work in Macau anymore. So yeah, so I mean, I think we see that in quite a few countries in the region. I mean, I think you have cases like that really actually all over in many countries. And I don't really think that the migrant workers in Macau is a particular exception for the hardship. So this is really something that ILO really puts, yeah, that we as ILO, of course, try to let's say put attention to, because yeah, it's like it's a very tough situation.
Okay, thank you, Christian. Okay, can I now turn to Ovi from the Dhaka Tribune in Bangladesh? Ovi, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, hello, am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, Ovi.
Yes. So far I know the report you launched today. I came to know that you here mentioned that the regional unemployment rate could increase from 4.4% in 2019 to somewhere between 5.2% and 5.7% in 2020. So my question is, do you have any specific data about Bangladesh? What percentage of unemployment rate can reach Bangladesh in case of Bangladesh? I mean, as per the last report, Bangladesh unemployment rate is 4.4. So where it could stand in case or after the impact of COVID in case of Bangladesh? Please specify this. Thank you for.
Yeah, I can take that one as well. So yeah, on Bangladesh, or generally like on these unemployment estimates, I think I mean, I think first of all we need to really emphasize that it's pretty much a big challenge to kind of project unemployment for the region. That's why we indicated a range of possible values, and we're not really willing to actually pin down one particular estimate. Yeah, this is simply because there's so much uncertainty out there. Also data, you know, like, I mean, for many countries, data are not available for 2020 yet. And I mean, for many countries, data are available, but then we see those data values with quite some time lag. So yeah, we are not yet 100% sure, you know, like what exactly will happen in the region, especially now in the fourth quarter, or how the data is going to look like. So that's why, yeah, we have not really developed any specific country estimates for Bangladesh. Or let's say we have developed estimates for some countries, of course, to kind of produce the regional estimate. But then, yeah, for some countries, we are, let's say, more confident in those numbers. For other countries, we are less confident in those numbers. So that's why, yeah, we are not really in a position at this point to say really how the unemployment rate would look like in Bangladesh for 2020. But I mean, as time passes by, I mean, early next year, for sure, we would have a better idea.
Okay,
maybe I can just add to that one quickly, that the only South Asia country that we have 2020 information for is unfortunately Sri Lanka. But you will find some interesting information on Sri Lanka in the report, and there we have seen quite a steady increase in unemployment until the third quarter. And in the third quarter, Sri Lanka, the unemployment rate goes down a bit. And again, this is similar to some of the other countries. So you might want to have a look at what's happening with the Sri Lanka data. Thank you.
Okay, let's move back to AFP. AFP, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you so much. I was wondering, because you were saying, for example, unemployment in less developed countries is not really something, like there aren't unemployment services in many countries in the region. So I'm wondering, what are some of the social services that are provided for people or families who need help, and what are you seeing that are either formal or informal social services being provided? And maybe if you can specify for Thailand, that would be great. Thank you.
Thailand's a tough one, but I mean, across the board, we've had previous reports that were put out for the Asia Pacific region. The ILO and ESCAP put out a report just a couple months ago to talk about the underinvestment in social services in the region. And they said that outside of healthcare, less than the countries in the Asia Pacific region are investing less than 2% in social protection, which is a gross underinvestment, especially knowing that the global average is 11%. So we have a quite severe issue here. It was there before the crisis. Now, during the crisis, we see that there's probably more urgency to do something about this. At least I would hope that there's some more urgency to do something about this. Now, where we are seeing social assistance to those that remain outside of the formal services is mainly cash transfers, income support, and countries are really, all countries in the region are doing a lot in the area of income support. So, you know, the story in Thailand was that the government gave 5,000 baht per month for a certain portion of time to those who are outside the formal sector that needed income support, whose income was in fact impacted by the COVID crisis, which is, you know, quite a nice service. But the question is, here we are 3-4 months down the line, and such cash transfers have since finished, but are these households back on their feet? And the answer is probably most likely they're not. So what will happen to poverty in Thailand is, this is where we have the statistic of increased working poverty in the region, because we think that social assistance will only get us so far. wages have declined. This is for both formal and informal workers, and households are unable to sustain themselves. So we're going to as the longer the crisis continues, the worse the picture will be, because we don't think that governments will be able to sustain the degree of support that they have very generously initiated at the beginning of the crisis.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Okay, let's move on now to Bruce. Bruce from ABS-CBN in Manila. Bruce, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Hi, thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'd just like to ask, maybe in broad strokes, the report is saying that we are seeing already an improvement regionally in terms of the unemployment figures. If I may zoom in the Philippines, because I'm from ABS-CBN News here in Manila, we're also seeing that same trend. If ever, what does the ILO see? Is this trend seen to continue in the coming years? Is unemployment, when is the unemployment figure, or are the unemployment figures expected to maybe go back to pre-pandemic levels in the region? And if you may also say specifically in the Philippines or Southeast Asia. Thank you. Also, one more quick follow-up after this. Thank you.
Well, I think if we look at the economic data, which maybe Christian is better oriented better suited to speak on, but I mean, the GDP data talks about a recovery in 2020, a very slight recovery in 2021 for some countries, and in others not till 2022. So we need the economy to start heating up, and job creation to heat up, so that unemployment, those persons who are not just unemployed but outside of the labor market, to also be reabsorbed into jobs. So I do think it's going to take some time. I do not yet think we're at the peak of the crisis impact, especially since we haven't yet healed ourselves. It will take some time now for vaccines to roll out in this region. So let's say, and for countries to feel confident enough to open themselves up. And even when the countries are opened up, the question is, how quickly will trade recover? So I do think it's going to take at least 1 to 2 years, but maybe Christian would like to say something additional there.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is just to echo what you have been saying. I mean, I fully agree. I mean, I don't think that we would see a recovery like, yeah, very, very fast, because I mean, okay, so I think there's globally, I mean, we all have, I think lots of hope in those vaccines that are now out there that start to be used. But then, I mean, we all know that, you know, like it will take some time, you know, like to kind of, yeah, get everyone or many people vaccinated. And then, so that's why I think it will take some time to get the pandemic under control. And I do think that, you know, like it's a kind of precondition really for sustainable economic growth and job creation, that this pandemic is under control to some extent, at least, because yeah, only then yeah, people will go again shopping, will buy again stuff, go to the shops, feel confident to go there, will start to feel confident traveling, yeah, making some tourist travels. And many countries in this region are highly dependent on tourism. The Philippines, I think, as well. So yes, but it will take some time until this is going to happen. So I mean, I would also not really predict yeah, a recovery or a complete recovery before let's say the next 1 or 2 years are past. Yeah. But I mean, we all hope for the best, but I think it's very difficult to imagine that a complete recovery we would see earlier than that.
Bruce, do you want to ask your follow-up?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for those answers. You mentioned that we may not see that recovery in the next 1 to 2 years. But what can governments do, especially in countries like the Philippines? What can they do to maybe accelerate this trend, to maybe create a more stable labor market moving forward? You mentioned here earlier that the COVID-19 pandemic will really, in the report, that will really cause disruptions to around 10.9 million workers here in the Philippines, or a quarter of total employment in the Philippines. So what can the government do to protect these persons, these workers, and moving forward, what can they do to make sure that the labor market can come out stronger after this?
Start. So, I mean, governments are certainly doing a lot already in sustaining the income of households, as I've already mentioned, and also supporting enterprises to retain workers for as long as possible. There's been a lot of investment in wage subsidies, and the ILO released its global wage report I think just last week, which said that the efforts that governments have been making in supporting wages through wage subsidies has offset approximately 40% of the, what would be wage drops. Well, otherwise have been more severe wage drops. That was for developed countries, but certainly in developing countries, there also has been some quite strong support to enterprises. So, but again, as I said, the longer the crisis goes on, and the longer that enterprises suffer, eventually they run out of cash and have to close their doors. And this is why the unemployment could continue to increase over the next few quarters. So what governments need to do is to continue to support those who are most harshly hit, those who are most vulnerable, including the working poor, through cash transfers, through food supports, which a lot of countries are also doing. Now, those are the more immediate measures, but I hope that a lot of countries, a lot of governments are also starting to think more in the medium and longer term, and thinking about how they want to address the longer term deficiencies. I mean, the deeper deficiencies, including the insufficient investment in social protection, so that they are in fact better ready, more prepared when the next crisis comes around, which it will. These things come in cycles. So also, they will certainly need to invest more in employment programs like active labor market policies that can help the job seekers to be better matched. And oftentimes, again, employment subsidies help in that front. Employment services are quite weak in a lot of the countries. We might want to think about also concentrating government support on what will be some of the growth sectors of the future, such as areas of renewable energy. And again, there's a lot of talk about this amongst some of the governments already, and we hope that that will continue in the future. But until we overcome these longer term deficiencies, which it's difficult for governments to think about now, but they should think more long-term in focusing on what we call the human-centered future of work. And we're not going to get there until we do a lot more in investing in lifelong learning, until we do a lot more in investing in social protection, in making sure that women have the same access to decent jobs as men, and that labor protections are much stronger. And we also consider finally doing something to overcome the prevalence of the informal economy in this region. So we know that there are reasons why so many workers and enterprises continue to exist in the informal economy, and we really think that now is the time to kind of do more to tackle that and bring them into the realm of formalization.
Okay, thanks. Let me now turn to Rayad. Rayad from the Daily Ittifaq in Bangladesh. Would you like to ask your question, Rayad?
Thank you. The report shows in case of COVID-19 fiscal policy response, Bangladesh position is below the median. How should Bangladesh can initiate further as a fiscal policy support? Have you any specific suggestion for Bangladesh? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think that we have a specific suggestion for Bangladesh, but because I mean, I think our recommendations would hold probably for a range of countries. So I mean, I think for Bangladesh as for other countries, I think it's really important to consider, you know, like that this crisis is not yet over. So that I mean, there are some vulnerable workers out there. That need support, and there are also some enterprises that continue to be hit hard, and yeah, they just need support to workers need support to sustain their livelihoods. Enterprises need support to survive, and I think it's really important, yeah, that this support that is needed continues. Other than that, is like, yeah, I mean, I think as Sarah just mentioned, I think it's also important, of course, to look at the longer term and to see, yeah, how, for example, a more adequate sort of protection system could be put in place. Because what we have also seen is that those countries that had such systems already in place, they were, for example, yeah, much more ready, and yeah, for them it was much easier actually to put in place now these emergency measures, because I mean they had the infrastructure in place. So yeah, I think it's important also to, of course, in the medium or longer term to look at this. How can we protect more workers with an adequate social protection system? Thank you.
Okay, Andre, would you like to go ahead?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Andre.
Yes, thank you so much. I would like to ask a second question, because just now it was mentioned the importance of vaccines in the recovery, looking forward to 2021. And now precisely many countries and regions are starting to unfold their vaccination campaigns. But we know that in so many countries and in Asia Pacific too, the migrant workers are often excluded from legal health protection. How important is that migrant workers in Asia Pacific are included in the vaccination campaigns that the government will deliver in the next coming months, for their protection, but also for the situation in those countries? Thank you so much.
Well, I would say that we know that in this region, the economic contribution of migrants is so important. And I do think that governments are quite rightly recognize this and will do the right thing in making sure that their migrant workers have access to the vaccines. They might not be first in line to get the vaccines, but I do think that most governments will be able and willing to support rollout also to migrant workers. It's they'll have to. We know that they continue to invite migrant workers in, and in order to keep their own population safe, they'll want to make sure that the migrant workers are also COVID-free.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if there's no other questions, and I don't see any other hands up, let's wrap things up, and I'd like to thank everybody for taking part. Just a reminder that the embargo ends at 2 o'clock Thailand time, which is 15 minutes from now. If anyone would like to do any kind of follow-up interview or get in touch with us, the email address is asiapacific, one word, @ilo.org. We'll put that in the chat as well. And so if you need any follow-ups at all, there will also be a recording of this briefing available shortly. If I can ask you to put your emails, everyone taking part, with their email address in the chat, and then when the recording is ready, we can send you all the link. It will be an hour or so before that's ready, but then we can send that all on to you. So let me close proceedings. Thank you everybody for taking part, and hope to meet you all online or in the flesh again at some point soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.